Hi, I'm back to speak to you on the topic of fear, and in line with the previous video I did where I spoke a little bit about courage. I thought I would continue along that vein. I recently heard a talk by a well-known academic and writer in psychology, Zimbardo. I forget his first name, I think it's Philip Zimbardo, who was made famous with the Stanford prison experiment. And the reason I bring him up is because he spoke of something called everyday heroism. I don't think he actually calls it everyday heroism, but that's at least what I understood him to mean. So what is everyday heroism and how does it relate to fear? Well, I think it's kind of difficult to define heroism in that sense. I think we all have a sense of the heroic, but generally speaking, we associate heroism with something quite extraordinary. So ordinary heroism would be to do the right thing, or at least be able to refrain from doing the wrong thing, possibly getting other people to not do the wrong thing. Now, this is a tricky area. Before I go on to describe the trickiness of the area, let me just also mention sort of 4 steps, as it were, for concepts that was mentioned by the Dalai Lama in a book that I read of him. I'm not sure to which degree this would translate to all Buddhism and whether it is a relatively accurate reflection of Tibetan Buddhism, but there were these 4 steps where you first stop doing bad things, then you stop thinking bad things, then you start thinking good things, and then you start doing good things. As a sort of a prescript for life, that sounds just swell. I'm not sure that we would necessarily agree with those steps in psychology, because, for instance, sometimes in our self-evaluation, we may need to start doing good things so that we can start thinking good things. So the order is not necessarily the same, but I think the intent of that message stands. Okay, so it sounds like a really simple thing, but of course it's not that simple. So the prevalence of the so-called social justice warrior movements across mainly Western shall we call them civilizations or cultures, is a good example of groups of people, or individuals even, who seem to desire or seem to intend to do good, but in some odd and interesting way they are often caught up in the emotionality of what they are doing, and they end up doing things that are not so good. The most recent example of this, I can't reference it adequately, but it was a relatively young man who seemed to be, well, present. Not sure if he participated in any way at a gathering of people where the issue was around abortion, and there were some pro-abortion people there, and then the person with the camera was a pro-life activist, or she represented the pro-life position, and he then proceeded to kick her. And from the little bit that one can see, and one should always be careful to make judgments on little bits of information, he seemed quite convinced of the appropriateness of doing so. I also read or a quoted tweet this morning where a person said, well, if somebody is a Nazi, and let's not get into the meaning of words right now, but if somebody is a Nazi, and even if that person is a woman, and it's okay to punch Nazis, it should be okay to punch women. So, okay, there might be circumstances under which it is okay to punch people. So I'm not going to discuss that right now, but it should be fairly obvious how something that seems like it has the best of intent sometimes go horribly wrong. Now, a lot of these people, I am sure, and I have heard and seen, regard themselves as quite heroic. They are standing up against something that they regard as bad. But objectively, they are clearly not heroic. They are not doing good things. They are using bad things, bad means, bad behavior, bad language, bad thinking to do this thing that they self-justify as being good. Okay, so why go on about that? I think what I'm trying to get at is that we must be careful with the intent that we have. I forget, is it There's a British philosopher who speaks on effective altruism, McGaskill, I think, maybe. Yeah, sorry, my memory is not doing well with names today. And in his talks, he makes it quite clear how bad we are sometimes at evaluating what kind of good we can do with our deeds of altruism. And one of the forms of altruism would be to donate money, and how bad we are sometimes at evaluating who to donate money to, or the extent of the good that we can do by our donations. That sometimes we do more harm. It is fairly well known that a great many so-called charity organizations end up spending a very small portion of the money they make or that they gather on the actual cause, and they end up they end up spending a lot of that money on the maintenance of the organization rather than on the object that was supposed to be the focus of the organization. So we have to be quite careful. Now, I don't want to diminish the importance of doing good. I think for the purposes of this conversation, what I would like to emphasize is that I think one of the most appropriate places to start is almost always to try and figure out how we as individuals can become better and how we as individuals can act in better ways, rather than trying to go and fight a cause whereby we trying to change the behaviors of others. Now, of course, there are certain circumstances where that is appropriate. We wouldn't have things like laws and police and even armies if circumstances never warranted those kinds of groups or establishments. But that is not the focus of this talk. The focus of this talk is to say, okay, but look at your own life. What is there? What happens inside of you? You're driving in a car and somebody swerves in front of you and you go ballistic. You or on the edge of reacting with some form of anger, aggression, maybe even violence. And, how appropriate is that? I'm not saying that it won't be easy for someone to justify it. I'm saying, is that really a good thing? So, everyday heroism in that context would be to actually conquer that dragon, that internal dragon, and say, okay, to in some form to get to a place where you're able to do something better, to think something better, to say something better. Not to reach for an ultimate goodness, but just for something to be at least less bad, and hopefully for something to become better, for you to become better. What behaviors do you have that you think, well, really, is that the best kind of thing for me to do? And there are so many examples that one can give. I'm not going to go down that route, but to basically self-evaluate and just to ask yourself, okay, so is this thing that I think, do, say, is this something that makes me a better person? Let's take one example. Let's take something like gossip. Now, there are some lines of thought that would say that gossip is not an altogether bad thing, that it has a social bonding kind of effect, such as it might be. I suppose the counter question can be, well, that may be how we evolved, but are we not at a place where we need to start relying on other facts or other means to socially bond? And is gossiping about someone, does that make me a better person? So, as an example. But there are a great many examples, kinds of habits that we have. Let's say something like smoking. Is this making me a better person to smoke? Am I contributing anything to the world? And I'm not saying that is necessarily a behavior that you need to stop there. Or there is also research that seems to suggest that sometimes smoking has actual benefits for the people who smoke. Not necessarily physical health benefits, but maybe mental health benefits. So we must be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. So, but as an individual, to sit down and really think, okay, but the thing that I do, say, the way I behave, is there some way to become better? I think one of the added benefits when we then link it to fear is if we start acting in heroic ways, this kind of everyday heroism, where we manage to overcome difficulties, or we manage to challenge ourselves in ways that lead to visible or measurable kind of growth or development in a positive direction. The way we evaluate ourselves, the way we think of ourselves as heroic, can also grow. Now, this may not immunize you against fear, but it might give you a little bit of an edge that you might not have had previously, where you then have gotten to know yourself as a person who can challenge or who can confront things that are scary or difficult, and that you find the means within and maybe without to then challenge these things. And I think it's a worthwhile project. In the comments that you leave, maybe you can give specific examples, or if there are questions that you have, maybe we can get back to this topic. I would like to engage around this, because I think it is an important notion, the notion of everyday heroism. It is very complex, and really one needs to speak about this for much longer. There are also problems with this notion, but I think it is, as a generality, I think it's an interesting and provocative way of thinking. If you like anything that you have seen on this video, in this video, or on this channel, please subscribe, and I would appreciate any kind of feedback that you have. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and I hope that you found this useful, interesting. Bye-bye.